Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, welcome. My name is Ella and I make videos on Wicca and witchcraft. So for today's video I will be introducing runes to you. I have actually asked you guys on my Instagram if you have any specific questions about runes so that I wouldn't forget anything, and you did come up with a lot of really good questions, so I will be answering them in this video. Please keep in mind that this is obviously a huge topic. People study runes for a living in universities and everything, so it is an immense topic and I will definitely not be able to, touch upon every single thing in this video. It is definitely a more condensed sort of video, just to give you a little bit of a head start, let's say. So definitely regard this video more like dipping your toes into the subject of runes rather than a complete course or guide. So let's start with some of the more basic questions, or the foundation, as well as some starting points for beginners. Runes are a pre-Latin alphabet used mostly in Old Germanic times in Europe, with the first discovery of runes being around 150 AD. And they were used up until the medieval time period and approximately around that time frame. Europe actually only changed to the Latin alphabet after Christianization came around, making runes less and less common in an alphabetical sense, and more so maybe within the magic world, or perhaps even as decoration or jewelry pieces. The name rune itself actually means something hidden or mysterious. There's a lot of runic lore from the Edda poets, which are Icelandic poets. Runes are both used within an alphabet as well as within magic and the occult and witchcraft. They are quite a similar tool actually as sigil magic within the context of magic, so if it's not alphabetical then it is definitely more of a sigil type of use, or very similar to that. The use of runes within divination is actually a little bit disputed within historians, because they never really found a solid sort of proof that they ever were used by divinators, or within divination, let's say, whilst they do have a lot of proof for oracles or seers or any kind of witchcraft related sort of practice, that never really explicitly shows proof for runes being used within that realm, just because there's a little bit of a lack of evidence. However, historians do agree that it was very likely that they used runes, but again, it's not a hard fact. So we actually see runes a lot more commonly used within magic nowadays. So countries or places that were mostly known for runes are Norway, Iceland, Sweden, and Germany. And even countries such as England and northern Italy have a little bit of proof or a little bit of traces of runes. And they did spread quite widely within Europe because of migration, raiding, that sort of thing. So you will definitely see runes here and there. So it is quite an interesting subject if you are more into it. So in older times they were mostly used for written language. It was the alphabet before the Latin alphabet came along. And they also were used in magic, and as well as in amulets and in talismans. Particularly folk magic is using runes because, of course, old European witchcraft and magic surrounded mostly around those kind of themes. Runes would be carved into stones or into wood, and were even said to be tattooed on the body. However, there is also not a lot of evidence with the tattoos, but that's a different topic. And you can actually still find a lot of rune stones in today's world, especially in Sweden, Norway, and northern Germany. There also were stories or written evidence that runes were painted onto the body during war or battle times, and they also were, of course, painted on, for example, Viking ships and homes and things like that to protect one's property. Nowadays, runes are mostly common within sigil magic or witchcraft in general, as well as in jewelry and in art and even clothing. So runes have really become very, very popular, almost more so recently, so it's a really interesting thing. And of course, runes have also become popular in the world of witchcraft, in particular in divination. Runes could even be found within popular logos such as the Bluetooth logo, and even a lot of German neo-pagan movements. Runes have definitely come a long way and have been used widely in positive and in negative senses, so yeah. they definitely have quite a history. Yes, there are 3 main types. So there are 3 main runic alphabets, and I apologize if I'm butchering this name. I am not Norwegian or Icelandic, I am half German, so you know, it's probably not going to be quite accurate. So we have the Elder Futhark, that's where I don't know how to pronounce it, it's either Futhark or Futhark, which is from around 150 to 800 AD. Then there's the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, again Futhark, 400 to 1100 AD. And then there is the younger Futhark, so that's from 800 to 1100 AD. Please let me know how you pronounce it, any Icelandic or Swedish or Norwegians or whatever. Let me know how you pronounce it properly, or if that was already kind of okay. Yeah. The younger Futhark then also developed into further sets of runes. So the set that is mostly used today in divination is the Elder Futhark, which a lot of people simply refer to as Viking runes, or sometimes Norse runes. Fun fact, Viking is not actually an ethnic group of people, it is actually referring to an occupation such as pirate. So the names and the meanings vary from type to type, and a lot of different places online and in books will give you a really broad kind of varying meaning to every single rune. Whilst the alphabetical rune set has been translated pretty accurately, the more symbolic meanings are a little bit less accurate and more blurry. So my advice actually on that is to look at different types of meanings and then compare them to each other, and you will most likely get the most accurate sense of the runes by doing that. The problem is also, of course, things sometimes get lost in translations, or you know, from German and Icelandic or Germanic language, translating it into modern English can be a little bit tricky. So a lot of the runes are more so energy or vibe, let's say. Certain runes may have fertility and love, and it's just that sense of energy that they may be trying to convey. Here is the most common kind of meaning set that I usually use in my personal practice. Yes, so there were, as mentioned earlier, 3 different sets of runes that were commonly used, which were then used, of course, in different areas. So you could kind of say that the different tribes had different sets of runes. However, due to migration and raiding and all that sort of stuff, the runes are relatively similar to each other, as well as in shape or in how they were drawn, as well as in meaning. However, different cultures did have their own set of symbols a lot of times. So you might see Germanic runes in more German and surrounding areas, let's say, but for example the Baltics had their own set of symbols, and it's kind of similar to how the Egyptians had the hieroglyphs. However, of course, it has to be recognized that hieroglyphs, for example, were also more an alphabet rather than sigils used for magic. So just as mentioned, different cultures did have different sets of symbols that they commonly use, as well as, of course, alphabets. So, you know, of course, the Arabic alphabet looks very different to, for example, the Norse runes, and so on and so forth. However, in terms of magic, rune specifically is a very Northern Europe, Germanic type of divination and word. So therefore, runes are quite specific to Germanic areas. However, of course, as mentioned, many places outside of Europe did have their own sort of sets of sigils or alphabet. Again, a great example are the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which was, of course, an Egyptian version of the alphabet. However, in my rather quick research on the Egyptian alphabet, I did not really find much evidence to prove that the Egyptian alphabet was also used similar to runes in magic or in divination and in such things. They were not, as far as I have understood, inscribed in, for example, swords or in boats for the same manner that runes were. But however, I may be wrong with that, because I did only research the Egyptian hieroglyphs very briefly, because it's definitely not my expertise. So if I am wrong, or if you have more knowledge on the subject, definitely leave it in the comments below. Runes actually do have more resemblance to, for example, the more Chinese system of I Ching, which is a divinatory system. However, that also is not my level of expertise, so definitely research that on your own if you are more curious about, for example, the Chinese I Ching divination method. The earliest account of runes really being used in a context of magic are the Edda poets, which, as I said earlier, they are Icelandic poets surrounding the entire mythology, Thor and Odin and Freyr and all of these very, very popular deities. These poets actually were preserved by Christian monks, so thank you for that, as that is the only reason we now actually know about Thor and Odin and Freyr. In one of these stories it is told that Odin hung himself from the world tree, and I'm definitely gonna butcher this name, Yggdrasil, for 9 days until he found the runes, which he then quickly grabbed, and he then also saved his own life. So the use of runes in specifically divination, as I mentioned earlier, is a little bit blurry. There is not really any proper evidence that runes were really specifically used for divination or fortune telling. So runes were carved or inscribed into, for example, swords or shields and things like that to be more successful in battle and, you know, on raids or protection for going across the ocean. So runes being used for divination was brought back, I guess you could say, in the 17th century, popularized by mostly Austrians and Germans in around 1902. However, the first real book on runes was really late, in 1982 by Ralph Bloom, and I'm going to be linking his book in the description box below if you're curious about it. Now, it has become quite mainstream in popular witchcraft culture and the occult, as well as various different esoteric practices. And a lot of people, even outside of the Germanic culture, have now started using runes in their practice. So this is a very personal thing, as it really just depends on your personal preference. If you prefer the use of pendulums, if you prefer the use of tarot cards or oracle cards, and if you are comfortable with using a Germanic divination system. Whereas tarot isn't really cultural specific, where, you know, historians also are kind of going back and forth a little bit, and you'll see a lot of things on, you know, social media arguing about that. On the most broad terms, tarot isn't very culturally specific, and neither are pendulums. Pendulums have been used around the world by various different cultures, though in different forms. So in my personal practice, I mostly use tarot and secondary runes. I don't work as much with the pendulum just because I don't personally connect as much with it as I do with runes and with the tarot cards. So the traditional tarot cards have 78 cards in one deck, and then you have either 78 card meanings, or you are looking at both reversed and upright card meanings, making it double. So it is a lot of remembering the cards and the meanings and the symbols, numerology and everything, whereas runes have usually 24 runes in one set, so it's already a lot less to remember. However, they do act very different within the world of divination. Tarot cards have a million different ways of interpreting them, the different meanings and symbols, and it also depends on who's reading your cards, or if you're reading your own cards, they can really mean a bunch of things. Runes are much more specific in a certain sense, because runes have very specific sets of meaning, and whilst you can definitely also interpret those, of course, it's usually a little more, they usually are a bit more specific, in my personal experience at least. Now with pendulums, for example, is my least favorite technique to work with, because it's the least accurate as far as accuracy goes with these type of things. But with the pendulums, of course, you have quite a set yes or no sort of question going on here. So with pendulums, it really is, will I pass this exam, yes or no? Whereas with runes, it might be a bit broad of an answer, and tarot cards are definitely the most symbolic answer. However, it is really up to you what you connect with the most. You might be getting a very different experience from runes, or pendulums for that matter, or tarot cards than I am. And of course, for some people it is easier to learn the 24 rune meanings rather than 78 card meanings. So again, this is a very personal kind of take, and I personally would probably not be that comfortable with sharing my runes with just anyone. However, if it is someone that I'm very comfortable with, for example with my fiance, then of course I would let him use my runes as well. There usually is a bond between a practitioner and their tools. So if you should have your own set, depends on if you have a coven or a family that is using the rune set together. However, I definitely think it is not a bad idea to have your own rune set to really get used to them and experience them in their own kind of way, connecting with only you. I think it's quite a nice experience, but again, it's really up to you, the environment that you are in, and if you also are able to actually get your hands on some runes. It can also definitely depend on what kind of household you are in. For example, if you are in a very strict Christian household, for example, then card readings can actually be a lot easier for you to get your hands on, because oracles and tarot cards do exist that have a very Christian theme, and it's not as, you know, tricky for you, for example, whereas runes definitely have that pagan, very pagan strong association, and it may be a little bit more difficult to explain yourself in case there ever come problems or questions from family members. And upon you sharing or using someone else's tools, that depends on the other person and if they are comfortable or not with sharing them with you. Again, if you are having one set of runes within a shared coven or a shared family, that of course probably is more likely that it's fine to use the runes. However, if you do want to share your runes, I definitely suggest cleansing them every once in a while or after every use. Again, how often you want really. So yeah, that's really that. The most common materials that they are made of are wood, stone, ceramics or ceramics I think it is, and even bone. It really is a matter of preference and availability. Bones, for example, may not be everyone's cup of tea, which of course is very understandable. So if you would prefer something more vegan, then perhaps crystals or stones or wood is better for you. Now another one is, of course, wood is very available because you can really make the runes yourself by just getting, like, you know, the little wooden pieces and drawing or burning in the runes yourself. The same can be done with just some stones or pebbles, whereas for example crystals that have the runes engraved are already a bit more fancy, but they are quite available as well. Again, it really depends on your preference. I prefer crystals just because I love to work with crystals. I have a crystal shop, and I am actually looking at stocking runes in my shop, so they should hopefully come somewhat soon. So again, for a more budget version, you can make them yourself by simply collecting a couple of beautiful pebbles or even seashells you could use. You can really let creativity flow here. So, you know, wood, stones, seashells, nuts, for example, would also work. Really anything that has a somewhat flat surface area where you can draw the runes upon, or you can also get one of those fancy wood burning tools and burn it in. Of course, keep in mind to be safe with that kind of tool. Now, if you are using, for example, crystals, different crystals may be more practical to use within rune magic. So for example, black onyx is more protective, amethyst is better for tapping into that psychic kind of and, you know, intuition kind of energy. So different crystals do have different properties that may work better for you and the type of rune casting that you would like to work with. So I actually had my first set of runes from my mother that I found in her wardrobe, I think like 15 years ago or something like that. At this point, I don't remember. I probably was like 8 years old, and I've just kind of kept it ever since. But she knows about it, so it's fine. And my second set of runes I've actually only been recently gifted by Witch Casket. So if you are looking for a beautiful set of runes, I can definitely recommend those. And I'm also linking a couple of Amazon links for rune sets below as well. So there's a couple of different methods that you can use for casting your rune stones. As a beginner, I think the best method is really just holding your pouch of runes in your hand, putting your intention or your question into it, and then randomly picking one rune and analyzing and interpreting that. You can definitely also use a book or an online website to help you with that meaning. And I definitely also suggest writing down your findings into your grimoire or your book of shadows. Now, another technique is using 3 rune stones. Again, that would be the easiest way to do that would once again be by holding your bag, asking your question, and then randomly picking 3 rune stones, laying them out, and then seeing what the meaning of each is. And with that, you can really play around. It can be past, present, future. It could be what's the problem, what's the best approach, what's the likeliest outcome. You can really kind of play around. It's very similar to the tarot card 3-card spread. Or you can also do the very traditional 9-stone runestone casting, where the 9 is really symbolic because of it having a lot of significance in Norse mythology. So once again, that time you're holding the bag, and then you can take out 9 stones and then throw them onto the table or a cloth if you have one. And it is said that the center more runes are more important to your question, whereas the runes that are lying further outside are less important to your question. As I said previously, yes, definitely, you can really be creative in this type of world. Let's say, again, stone, wood. I think I've repeated myself a couple of times in this case. So yeah, you can definitely be creative with creating your own runes and have a lot of fun doing so too. I think having your own energy in the runes is definitely a great way to bond with them, whereas if you buy runes, you will probably have to baby them a little bit more to really bond with them. But of course, it's really up to you and your preference. There's not a better or less good way to go about this. I've bought my runes and I really like them and bond with them, so it's up to you. The easiest method, or the method that I would suggest, is definitely cleansing your runes, especially if you've bought them, and then definitely keep them by your side. It's very similar to, for example, using tarot cards. Just keep them by your side every day. Pick one of the runes and see how you feel about it and write it down, and just kind of like baby them a little bit to get used to them. You can then of course also bless them with a proper little ritual, or by using smoke, for example, or sound or water to cleanse your runes. This kind of does depend on the material that you're using, and also if the pen that you used on your runes, in case you made them yourself, is waterproof or not. So do be careful with that. This is really a somewhat tricky thing to answer because, as I previously mentioned, the meanings kind of vary from page to page, from book to book. So I again suggest for you to kind of just look at a couple of different book sources and pages and go with what feels right and go with the most collective kind of meaning, and then that is probably the best way to go meaning wise. And of course, no one's going to be mad at you for referring to a cheat sheet for you if you are not quite familiar with your runes just yet, or if you have some certain questions or can't remember all of the meanings for an individual rune. So besides casting a singular rune every single day, similar to how you would with tarot cards, one way that I like to have my runes incorporated into my daily life is by having them everywhere. So for example, on my phone case, I have one in the inside of my phone case to protect my personal space, let's say, because I always have my phone with me. You can also use runes in a written sense, so you could, for example, with body lotion, write runes onto your body. You can tattoo them on. I actually have a sigil tattooed on my wrist. However, that is not a rune technically, though it's very similar. You can, with your hands, just make the symbols in front of, for example, your door when you're leaving your apartment or your home to protect it. You could have runes written or laying around, let's say, in different places in your apartment. So for example, one rune in every corner of your apartment to protect you, to bring in wealth or happiness or whatever it may be. So it's really, once again, up to you. I feel like this entire video I've been saying it's up to you. But yeah, just, you know, be creative. In my opinion, broken or incomplete sets are actually a great thing to use in your practice, in particular, for example, with spell bottles or charm bags where you can put a singular rune in them and you're not going to miss it out of your pouch. You can also be putting runes in, for example, your pockets or your wallets or your bra, wherever you want to. You can bury them around your garden for specific purposes, unless they're of course plastic, like don't litter of course, but if they are stone, for example, or even crystals, you could bury them around the place or in plant pots. You can also carry a rune every single day depending on what your need is or what your intentions are. You can also gift them to family members or friends if they are in need of any specific rune magic. And you know, you can really again be creative and just have kind of fun with them, experience them a little bit, and yeah. Yes, that's actually the only way that I personally work with candle magic. I always inscribe runes into my candles whenever I use any kind of candles in my practice. They will always have 1 or 2 or 3 runes carved into them. You can also place your actual rune stones around the candle, or make, of course, for example, out of herbs or wooden sticks, for example, the runes once again around your candle. As a matter of fact, if you are making your own wand, or if you have an athame that you use in your practice, you can even carve your runes into those tools as well. So this is a little bit of a tricky question, because realistically speaking, if we knew that there were lost runes, they wouldn't really be lost. However, I do assume that there are some lost runes, or especially lost rune combinations, that we are either unaware of, or of course what is also perhaps a chance is that runes, the meanings are lost or lost in translation, or we just are not really sure about specific runes and what they mean, and so on and so forth. However, of course, there also are chances that there are truly lost runes that we've just never happened to find in excavations and things like that. But again, unfortunately, that I would not know of. Previously mentioned, the history is a little bit blurry. However, what we do know is that ancient people of Germanic times, or of the Germanic kind of cultures, would have runes painted on, for example, on shields, carved into swords, wearing them as amulets and things like that. They may even have stitched them into some clothing pieces for protection and so on and so forth. So that is the most likely use of runes back in the day in a more magical sense. And as with divination, again, I've answered that question already previously. You can definitely invent your own, though theoretically speaking that would be sigil making rather than runes, because runes do really refer to the Norse runes. A very common technique actually is making new combinations out of pre-existing runes, where you would have 1 or 2 or 3 runes that already exist and you combine them in a way to serve your personal intention. There are certain rules, let's say, to rune writing, which really just refer back to how they were written in the past, which were more logistic, let's say. So for example, if they were carved into wood, then because of the wood grain, they were mostly carved with straight lines, no horizontal lines, and they didn't really have curves, for example, because it would just be very tricky to write runes into wood with curves in them. Not quite, though the idea is very similar. So runes, of course, were also an alphabet, or predominantly an alphabet, whereas sigils are usually not. However, runes in a magical sense are very similar to sigils. The main difference really being that runes are an established system from way back when, whereas sigils can be created now, and sigils also are within varying cultures. So sigils is a very umbrella term, whereas runes refer to the Germanic runes. Runes also give you a lot more freedom, sigils also give you a lot more freedom, because you can really just create your own. You can be as creative as you want, as elaborate as you want, or as minimalist as you want. This is once again up to you. Runes traditionally were mostly used by themselves. The only real tool that you would have with them is the pouch that you keep them in, and maybe a cloth for throwing them on. However, you can definitely use runes in combination with other divinatory methods such as tarot cards, pendulums, really whatever you like. And lastly, a couple of book suggestions for learning more about runes. So I definitely suggest looking into the original book by Ralph Bloom. Again, not necessarily as a complete reference, but also more so as historical context. I personally actually only own two books on runes. One that I actually found in the attic of this house. This house is from 1730, so I have no idea when that book really came about. It is definitely older than 100 years because it's still written in Old German and it is before the World Wars. I think it does have a date on it, I'll have to check, but it currently is in boxes because we're moving really soon. And the other book I have on runes is also in German, so unfortunately I don't have English books that I personally own that I can really recommend, but I am leaving a list below in the description box with a couple of suggestions that I have just found on, for example, Amazon. So I am also going to be uploading a grimoire page that will be exclusive to my Patreons for the first few weeks, and then I will be uploading a somewhat similar version for free on my Patreon, and the link will be below. And you can also then find that on my blog. So thank you so much if you've made it to the end of this video. If you did like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you would like to support me and my channel, I do have a Patreon, as just mentioned, so the link will be linked below for that. I also have an open or public Discord server where you can join if you are more interested in Wicca and witchcraft. We've got some really lovely members in there that you can chat with and get ideas and talk about certain things within witchcraft and Wicca. And as always, I have all my links to my crystal shop and all my socials linked in the description box as well. So with that, I'm saying thank you, blessed be, and until next time, bye!